보시면 네. 예, 이번 세미나에 오신 분들 감사드립니다. Thank you very much for coming. So I would like to give a brief introduction of Professor Otsuka. It is my great pleasure to introduce Professor Jun Otsuka from Kyoto University Philosophy Department. Professor Otsuka holds degrees in philosophy, BA, MA, PhD, all from Kyoto University, and then he subsequently earned both a Master of Science in Applied Statistics and a degree in History of Philosophy of Science from Indiana University in the United States. He undoubtedly is a leading scholar of philosophy of statistics and evolutionary theory. It is a pity that he didn't have a chance to cover his another core research subject, mathematical theories of evolution, during this visit, but I hope we'll have another occasion to learn from his expertise in this area. In today's special seminar, Professor Otsuka is going to trace the philosophical foundations of empirical scientific practices of today, which also became a standard process of conducting research in social sciences, statistical hypothesis testing, touching the fundamental problems of inductive reasoning. And then he will extend his focus into newly popularized statistical inference techniques, including artificial neural networks, and discuss how new set of techniques have impacts on traditional norms of scientific inquiry. I do believe that we social scientists should engage with these fundamental aspects of statistics, our instruments, language tools, in order to get a better sense of understanding what we do, how to evaluate others' claims, choose correct tools, and comprehend future trajectory of social sciences. Please welcome Professor.
Thank you very much, Professor Song, and thank you very much, everyone, for coming here and provide me with this great occasion. It's my great honor and pleasure to give such a prestigious Institute of Social Science at SNU. This is a great occasion. Thank you very much. So today I want to discuss about as the title shows, the statistics and its role in the science in general. So it's a kind of quite big talk, big picture talk kind of talk. So I try not to be so technical, but I want to try to kind of portray some kind of general idea of why we use statistics and what is scientific objectivity and so on. So I try to make it kind of as enjoyable possible. And so if you have any questions or comment, then please feel free to interrupt and ask anything. Okay, so let me briefly start with my. This way? This way. Oh. Yes. Oh, sorry. So my introduction. So, but actually, Professor Song has kindly introduced myself. I got a degree in both in philosophy and history and philosophy of science from Kyoto and also IU, Indiana University. And recently, I published this book, thinking about statistics. And the talk today, the first part of my talk today is basically based on this book. And the part of this book, I don't know why. Okay. A part of this book, I work on several projects. That one is the role of mathematical modeling in evolutionary biology. That says I wrote a small book here. There's a book here, and this is a philosophy and statistics. And recently, I work on the causality. Well, I have been working on causation, but also the kind of trying to explore new approach to causal inference and causal representation of causal structures using a category theory and so on. This is a kind of the my new project. And another interest of mine is representation learning, which I think I want to discuss later in my talk. and how the machine build a representation and what is the kind of implication for understanding our concept or our representation and so on. So I work on.
So this works.
Oh, this works.
Yeah,
Oh,
yeah,
thank you very much.
this-
Oh, okay, great, thank you. So I work on philosophy, philosophy on this side, and a bit of mathematics on this side, and the causation in this row, and the statistics and machine learning in this row. So it's kind of the mixture of different branches and the different topics. But today, my talk will be focused on this side, philosophy and statistics. All right. So but why we have to think about statistics? Why the philosophy of statistics? Well, statistics is everywhere, as you know, in science, business, politics, and so on. And it serves as a kind of rigorous inferential method for prediction, policy decision making, and policy evaluation, and so on. And also, it is an objective protocol for making consensus. And so we use it in peer reviews and authorization of, for example, drugs and so on. So it is useful for these purposes because it is considered as an objective method to reach a conclusion and a consensus. But the question then is why statistics can serve such important roles. This is a topic I want to discuss, I want to think about with you today. To deal with this problem, first I want to look at the role of statistics in scientific justification, because I think that statistics is a tool to justify scientific hypotheses. So this is concerned with the present use of statistics. And then I kind of change the gear on the second part, and how the concept of objectivity, which now the statistics are part of this kind of scientific objective protocol, but how the objectivity in the science in general and the justification in general has been formed in the history of science. So I'm going to take a look at the past. And also in the third part, now we have AI everywhere, getting AI and everywhere in society and also scientific disciplines. So I want to have a bit of speculation about how this AI-driven science going to change our concept of objectivity and justification in science. So this is the kind of agenda of today. All right, so with that said, let me go into the first part, the role of statistics in scientific justification. So, science, it is very difficult to define science. Well, philosophers of science have trying to understand what science is, what is the correct definition of science is. We haven't reached anywhere close to the correct definition. It's very difficult, and I don't think there is a correct definition of science, or at least the correct definition of science. But anyway, as a working hypothesis, let us think science as a kind of rational and objective pursuit of truth. Well, of course, you know that science is not actually, many scientific practices are not rational and objective as we wish, but at least we have a kind of ideal that, science should be rational and objective. So upon this ideal, scientific knowledge stands upon two pillars, rationality, which include, of course, logical reasoning and including mathematics and so on. And on the other hand, it has an objectivity, which implies at least intersubjective agreement. So we have to agree upon scientific result, and it shouldn't contain any bias and so on. Of course, these are ideals, but ideals are important because the rationality, kind of assures understandability. So everyone should be able to understand scientific result if one tries hard. Well, of course, it's very difficult to understand quantum mechanics and so on. But if you're trying hard, well, you can understand it. So the science in general should be intelligible, right? And so the nature itself should be intelligible. That is a kind of ideal. And the other important ideal is publicness, public nature of science. The science is sought to be kind of for everyone. Well, science should serve for everyone. Scientific results should be applicable, should benefit everyone. So these ideals are important as in the society in general, because understandability means that the science is a kind of we pride ourselves in our scientific achievement, right? So that is because that we treat like scientific we treat scientific scientists like Einstein as a kind of hero, and we kind of pay respect for Nobel Prize winners and so on. So it's a kind of big thing. So science is kind of human pride. And also in the public nature, well, it's justify the use of taxpayers' money for the investigation and education and so on. If the science is only beneficial for something, well, those beneficiaries should pay. But given that science is sought to be beneficial to everyone, it's justify the use of taxpayers' money. So these are ideals, but ideals are important. But anyway, so what's the statistics rule here? I think the statistics plays a fundamental role here in this picture, because scientific knowledge is justified by rational and objective means, and the statistics play the fundamental role in this procedure of scientific justification. So that's the reason that we focus on statistics today, to understand the scientific rationality and objectivity. All right, so the process of scientific justification, we philosophers of science has kind of distinguished between two aspects of scientific practice. One is the aspect of discovery and innovation of hypothesis. So scientists come up with a hypothesis, and so they discover certain things and material and so on. But this process does not have to be rational. For example, if you dream something, and you may come up with a very good idea while you are sleeping. This is not rational, but you don't care about it. If you get a good hypothesis, it's a good hypothesis. There's no problem how do you get it. But then, if you get a hypothesis, you have to verify it, justify it based on data. And this process must be rational and objective, right? This justification process involves, of course, data collection, experiment, and encoding data, and do statistical analysis. And then you publish your research. I want to focus on this part here. I'll focus on this part because the justification it plays a fundamental role in here, and this is what makes science unique and distinct from other intellectual endeavor of human beings. Okay, so let's break down this justification process. Of course, the justification process there are various justification methods, but here I distinguish three processes. One is observation experiment. Well, of course, you have to observe data and do experiments and so on. And then you have to encode data. You have to turn this evidence into some kind of the data format. And then in many cases, you run statistical analysis. And there is a section in the paper which you document these processes. That is material and method section. This section is well, in many cases, it's usually boring, but it's important because it assures that your result, your scientific outcome, is justified in an objective and a rational way, right? And it is also very important to ensure the reproducibility, because the idea is that if you follow this material and the method, you can reproduce the result. And that section distinguishes science from other intellectual pursuits, for example, art and so on. There's no, I don't think there's no material and method section for the poetry and something. So, yeah. And also, the statistics plays a crucial part in material and method section or this process. So, I want to focus on this statistical analysis first, and then we will come back later to this observation and data encoding later in the second half. Okay, so finally, statistics. But why use statistics? Why statistics is essential? Well, because science want to say something about the world or the whole or the future from partial data. For example, if you want to say that some drug is effective for reducing blood pressure, of course your experiment only includes some sample, like 100 people or something, or maybe more. But anyway, it's a kind of finite, limited data. But you want to say that this drug is effective for everyone, right? So, but you haven't checked whether this drug really works with everyone. So you have to use some kind of inductive inference. But the problem of inductive inference, that is say something about unobserved things from the observed things. For example, I observed that all ravens were black. And from this, I predict that all unobserved raven is also black. But the problem is that I have not observed ravens. I have not observed unobserved ravens. So we cannot be sure about it. And Hume pointed out, Scottish philosopher Hume pointed out, inductive inference is impossible, logically impossible, without an assumption that of what Hume called the uniformity of nature. The uniformity of nature is an assumption that the future resemble the past. That is, these data come from the same source. So that is a crucial assumption in inductive reasoning. Well, I think that, you agree. I think you agree with this. And this leads to some kind of philosophical problem. This relates to a philosophical problem. One is ontological problems. Okay, so what is this uniformity of nature? This is an ontological problem. So what is this? How to model it? And the other is epistemological problems. How to know it from data? Because we cannot directly observe the uniformity of nature. So we have to make inference about it from what we can know. So then the question is how to know it, how to know the uniformity from data. This is an epistemological problem. Now, the same applies to statistical inference. Actually, I take the statistical inference is a kind of modeling of the uniformity of nature, what Hume called the uniformity of nature. We think there is a true distribution. When you use statistical analysis, we think there is a true distribution, and from which data, the current data and future data are drawn, right? So we assume that there is a uniformity of nature, which is a true distribution, but we don't know anything about the true distribution unless that we assume that, there is one. But this true distribution is usually can be very wild, so we cannot assume that it has a particular form. Well, we further make an additional assumption that this true distribution might be or can be approximated by certain kind of defined statistical, the equational form that has statistical model, including like distribution of families, like a normal distribution or Poisson distribution and so on, or regression model. So regression models think that, well, we don't know about the true distribution, but maybe it is distributed in this way or that way, and so on. So this is an assumption. And of course, there are more kind of fancier assumptions like time series, state space model, hierarchical basis, and so on. So these are all kind of statistical models that try to approximate the true distribution, which represent the uniformity of nature. So this is a kind of ontological assumptions, because we assume that the object under study, the target system, has a form that can well be approximated by these functional forms. So we think that they are such thing. And so this is our assumption about what they are. So this is an ontological assumption in statistics, and so in doing statistics, we commit to certain kind of ontological assumptions. So this is one thing. And the other thing was epistemological problem. Okay, so suppose that we assume a certain kind of normal distribution. So data follows a normal distribution. Then the distribution is determined by two parameters, means and variance. Then the question is how to estimate these parameters, right? And then we make an inference from data, and there are various ways to make such inferences. Well, hypothesis testing is one. We have Bayesian inference, or maximum likelihood, model selection, and so on. So we have a whole bunch of techniques to make inference about statistical models and its parameters. These are kind of epistemological methods. So these methods try to justify hypotheses, parameter hypotheses, or statistical model assumptions based on data. So that's what we call epistemology in philosophy. So these two aspects, assuming a statistical model or modeling with the functional forms of statistical model and making inference from data consist of two main tasks in inferential statistics. So let's say, well, I think that this all looks familiar to you, maybe, if you use the statistics, and maybe that might be a threesome. But I want to ask, well, it's about, oh, sorry, it's a philosophy talks. So I want to focus on this part. Well, I said that statistical methods are to justify hypotheses. But what does it mean to justify hypothesis? When the hypothesis got justification? That's the question that I want to ask today. Well, if you think about justification is not just a scientific concept. We justify many things in our ordinary life. So suppose that you get the hypothesis. Well, it's a little bit kind of old example, but in maybe past 3 or 4 or 5 years, well, there might be a moment where you thought that you doubt that maybe you might got COVID, or today, or you might got the flu or cold or something. And this is a kind of hypothesis, right? And you ask your boss, because I think I got the COVID, maybe I want to cancel today's meeting, or I want to cancel class or something. Well, but maybe your boss would ask, well, why do you think you got COVID? Well, you need a certain kind of justification, right? You cannot just randomly think, well, I got a COVID, so I'm going to skip today's work or something. You need a justification. Well, how do you justify it? Well, the first thing is if you have a reason, if you have enough reason, then that should count as a justification. That is, the epistemic agent, in this case you or me, has a legitimate reason for the belief that I got a COVID. Like I got exposed, or I didn't get a vaccine, or things like that. And philosophy, this way of justification is called internalist justification, because you justify your hypothesis from your own belief or your own ground, right? You have to know these evidence or reason, right? This is the first way. Another way is that, well, if the belief was formed by a reliable process, for example, you get the PCR or something, and I don't know anything about how it works. So I don't have any reason, to know the exact mechanism of those things. But well, it said, well, you are positive. Then, I think I have enough reason to just, I think I can justify my hypothesis that I got COVID. This is called externalism because I don't necessarily have a good reason for why everything works here, but I can resort to certain kind of external machinery that justify my hypothesis. So this is called epistemology. And actually, these two ways of justifications correspond to Bayesian statistics in one hand and the frequentist statistics on the other hand. The Bayesian statistics, I think, is internalist, and the frequent statistics is externalist. So let me briefly describe why there is such a correspondence, why I think such a correspondence. Let me start with the internalist epistemology. So what is that? Well, internalist justification, as I say, says that, well, our belief is justified if and only if. This IFF means if and only if. It is derived, the belief is derived coherently from background knowledge or information. So for example, in our case, suppose that, well, we want to justify that I am COVID negative. Then I had to correct all my background knowledge about exposure, whether vaccinated or not, or prevalence, and so on. And these together justify my belief that I don't get COVID. So here the requirement is that, well, you have to have epistemic access to all, or at least the most of background hypotheses, background beliefs and premises. And these must be explicit. Your reason should be explicit. So that is one requirement. And the another requirement is that your conclusion actually follows from your premises. That is, that the conclusion is logically derived, consistent from the premises. That is another requirement. Then the Bayesian justification looks like exactly this way. So because look at the Bayesian consider Bayes' theorem. What Bayes' theorem does is that it derives a posterior probability based on the prior and likelihood, right? And here, in many cases, well, of course, this is not necessary, but in many cases, the posterior probability and the prior probability are interpreted as a degree of belief, to what extent we can believe in the hypothesis. Here, the hypothesis is about the parameter value theta. And what this say is that your posterior belief on the parameter hypothesis is logically derived from your prior belief about hypothesis and likelihood. So here, likelihood and premise, the prior serves as a kind of premise. And the requirement is that you have to be explicit. You have to have an explicit specification of all prior data and likelihood in order to run the Bayesian analysis. And the Bayesian analysis Bayes' theorem assures the logical consistency of your posterior with respect to your premises, that is prior and likelihood. Sorry. Yeah. So it has the same structure as internalist justification. So in this sense, I say that Bayesian is internalist epistemology. Okay. Well, but so what? I mean, then what? Well, the internalist epistemology faces its challenge, and what I point out now is that its challenge is also the challenges for Bayesians. The challenge for internalist epistemology is that inference is only as good as premises, right? So the logical consistency only assures that your conclusion is correct if your premises are correct. When premises are not correct, well, it doesn't allow you to say the conclusion is also correct. Well, your conclusion is only as good as your premises. But then the problem is how to justify your premises, right? How to know that they are correct. Well, you cannot know whether they are correct, but the only thing you can do is whether you can or cannot justify your premises, and then how to justify them. In the Bayesian inference, we have two premises, prior and likelihood. So we have to justify these premises in time. So what are these things that justify prior and likelihood? It's the problem. Let me start with the strategies, various strategies for justifying prior. One popular way is washing out. That is, if you have enough data, your prior, the effect of your prior will be washed out. So, and your posterior converges to the true posterior distribution. So if n is large enough, yeah, and ideally if n approaches to infinity. So it's like trying to justify your prior. You kind of repeat the Bayesian update ad infinitum. Of course, it's great if we can do it, but that's a big if. We don't usually have a big sample, nowhere close to infinity, so it's not always available. But then how about using non-informative prior? That is, the idea is to use flat prior, and then at least we can eliminate bias, right? We are kind of we treat every hypothesis equally. So that is another common way. But there are some problems. That is, one is a subject. It is subject to variable transformation. So flat prior on theta is not a flat prior on theta squared, and so on. So you have to come up with a certain kind of the maximized entropy and so on. So you need to resort to some trick. And another problem is that, well, although it assures unbiasedness and eliminates arbitrariness, it does not guarantee the objectivity. It does not mean that your prior is correct, right? For example, if you are trying to know whether you get a rare disease or something, well, you cannot adopt a flat prior because you know that it is a rare disease. There's not your prior of having that disease is not one half, obviously. And the third way is to resort to data. That is the idea of empirical base. The empirical base adjusts prior or model in general with data, and the data here is understood as frequency. Well, that sounds like a kind of good idea. But the problem is that it violates one of the core principles of Bayesian that's called the likelihood principle. That is, you use data twice. I mean, you use the data to calculate the prior, and then you use the same data to update Bayesian to the posterior. So that's violate the likelihood principle. But I cannot go into that detail. But anyway, there's such a problem. So there are several problems for justifying prior, and actually these problems have interesting epistemological counterparts in the philosophical epistemology. But for the lack of time, I cannot go into that problem. That if you are intrigued by this parallelism, please take a look at my book. But I cannot go into this detail, but there are several challenges to justifying prior. And let me do very quick with justification of likelihood. You have to also justify likelihood. And likelihood is a kind of modeling assumption, the distributional assumption. So it includes like the normal distribution binomial Poisson chi-squared, or as I said, regression model is also a likelihood assumption. The question is how to justify these assumptions. The common way is a model check. You check the model with data, right? And see whether your assumption really fits the data. So in this case, if data is like this, well, it looks like normal, so it should be okay. But this doesn't look like normal, so this should not be okay. Maybe you have to think about the different distribution family and so on. Yeah, that looks good, but the problem is that the fit does not guarantee the correctness. Well, the fit can be by chance, or unfit, non-fit also does not mean that your model is wrong. I mean that not the non-fit may be caused by various other reasons, like your data might be corrupted, or your calculation might be mistaken, and so on. So there are various reasons that you cannot get the how to say unique answer here. So the justification in an internalist way is very difficult. So although there are various ways to justify hypothesis, but it faces challenge. So that is the interim conclusion here. Okay, so much with internalism, and let me briefly discuss the externalism as well. So what was the externalist justification? The idea is that justification is formed by a reliable epistemic process. For example, well, look, I think you think that you're looking at a white background right now. But how do you justify your belief that you are looking at a white background, white screen? Well, I don't think you can list a lot of reasons. Well, maybe you can just say, well, I'm looking at it. I see it. And that counts as a justification because your vision is a reliable process, right? That is a process with a low rate error. So if I take a PCR exam and if the PCR machine has a low false positive and negative rate, that's going to justify my conclusion that I am not COVID positive. The key factor here is that reliability of hypothesis testing and epistemic procedure. So the reliability of this machine is important. That is, their false positive and negative rates. And these are rates. So these are rates in repeated trial, right? So long run performance of this machine justify my conclusion. And if you look at various approaches and frequentist statistics, it's all about reliability. Frequentist statistics measures the reliability of inferential processes. For example, consider null hypothesis test. What is a null hypothesis test? It is a function from data to a two-point set that is rejection or non-rejection of null hypothesis, right? It is a function. And what are type 1 error, or what are alpha and beta? That is a type 1 error rate and type 2 error rate. Well, these measure false positive and false negative rate of a test, right? So these are probability of what percentage this test reject a true null and not reject a false null. So these are reliability measure of a test. And another technique, interval estimation. What is this? Well, this is a function, again, from data to a confidence interval. But what is a confidence interval? Well, it is a kind of net, It's a net that captures the true value alpha times out of 100, right? So it's a net with a certain reliability. So the test measures. So the important thing here is the test and the estimator measures not the probability that a given hypothesis is correct. Alpha does not mean that the probability of hypothesis. It is a probability of the error rate. It's a property of the machine, not the outcome. So that is very important, and that means that well, the error rate measure the reliability of the method used. So in this sense, these are the kind of the reliable process and so on. But then the problem for the externalism or frequentist in general is that how can we really be sure about the reliability of the test? As I said, reliability is the error rate in the repeated trials, repeated trials, but in most cases, you can't repeat, right? You have only one data set. So how from only one data set you can reliably measure the reliability of tests? That's the question. The one way is a bootstrap. The bootstraps kind of try to create a repeated data set out of one data set. And we use this to approximate the error rate of the test or estimators. So that is one thing. And the other thing is more common way maybe is checking the model assumption. So you can create a test, you can build a test or estimator only based upon a certain distributional assumption. So in order for this reliability measure to be correct, you have to justify your assumptions about statistical models. Otherwise, p-value is just a kind of a random number. So that means that you have to be responsible about the test assumptions, and that was the main message from the critics of the p-values, like the statement of American Statistical Association. So there's a very famous controversy about the p-value problem, and the main message I take it is that kind of you have to be responsible about your modeling assumption, because it is a modeling assumption that assures the correctness of reliability estimation. So without that, p-value is just a random number, as I say. So, and also, as I said, again, these problems or challenges for frequentist has a very interesting parallel with philosophical issues in externalist epistemology, which unfortunately I cannot address here, but it's interesting to see that the problem we face in philosophy and the problem you face and we face in the statistics, there are very interesting parallelism between them. So, yeah, and that almost concludes my my talk on the statistics part. So the main message is that no assumption in, no inductive inference out. So statistics must make this assumption explicit, and first by representing the uniformity in terms of models, and next by providing a method to justify hypothesis. And that together form these two pillars of scientific justification, that is rationality and objectivity. And also, I want to add that the statistics play an important communication platform. So, well, in a way, the human's message is that it is impossible to know which inductive hypothesis is correct from data. No matter how big your data set is, well, it is a logical impossibility to know the exact answer. But we can justify some hypothesis over the other based on premises and data. And what is justification here? Justification is, in a way, it's a kind of social act. Well, it's a kind of communication, right? You justify your hypothesis to somebody, like your reviewers and so on, or your colleagues and so on. If you live in kind of the isolated island and you don't have any friends or any peers and so on, you don't have to use statistics. You do what you think it works, right? So peer reviews and so on, or approval from authorities, client and supervisor, these are all social factors. And statistics serve as almost, I would say, the rational and objective interdisciplinary platform for such scientific communications. So, well, that's, I think, is well captured by Pearson's book, well, old book. Well, this is not 1982, 1882, sorry, this is a typo. The grammar of science. Well, statistics is trying to serve as a grammar of science. So it's a communication platform. Well, of course, it serves for many other purposes. I'm not saying that the statistics is just a communication platform, but the communication tool is a kind of important aspect of statistics. All right, so that concludes the first part. So, okay, so that concludes the first part. So I think it's a natural break point. So if you have any question and comment, I'm happy to take. If not, I think we can go to the second part. But is that okay? Well, I think we can have a Q&A session later. So if you have a question, well, you can, of course, raise a question later. But is that okay? All right. So, yeah. Okay. Okay. Then let us go into the second part. Second part is kind of lighter than the first part. I put all the heavy stuff on the first part. So the second part is more like it's a kind of the speculation, just a kind of the rough idea. So you can be relaxed. Okay, so this is about automation and scientific justification. So here I want to change the gear and take a broader perspective on what scientific objectivity is. So again, this is the process of scientific justification, and we have been looking at this part. But we want to take the look at the bird's view on the whole part. So the idea of scientific justification, as I say, is the reproducibility. So the outcome of science should be reproducible. That is, results should not depend on particular individual scientist. The finding made in SNU should be applicable to anyone. For example, scientists in Kyoto University should reproduce the experiment and should obtain the same outcome, right? So that's the idea. And what we're going to see from here, from now, is that this ideal actually promoted the automation and mechanization of the justificatory process. So, and to act so, I rely on the various works on the history of science, the classics in the history of science. So these are not my work, so I want to introduce some of classic and the history of science. The first is the scientific observation. The first component is first scientific observation. So what counts as scientific observation? We make observation every day, but not necessarily scientific observation. What distinguishes the scientific observation and just ordinary observation? So Dawson and Garrison in their classic book, Objectivity, distinguishes several stages of objectivity, and one of their claim is that the notion of objectivity changed through history. Objectivity in the 18th century is that, well, you have to select representative model. So if you look at the picture or drawing from that era, they are very pretty. I mean, maybe you can hang on your room, or you can display in a nice cafe or something. So they are very pretty. So and these are very kind of artistic endeavor, right? So you have to eliminate irregularity, abstract away irrelevant details, and so on. So this is a very artistic. You need some kind of artistic talent to produce these data, to make these observations. But that changed in the 19th and 20th century, where scientists began to randomly select a model and try to use a mechanistic description like tracing or photography and record as it is, including noises. For example, like this is I think this is some kind of cell or something. It's not a tomato slice, so it has noise and it has kind of and also sort of things. So yeah, so this is a kind of the change of the notion of objectivity documented by Dawson and Garrison. Next, what count as objective data? What are objective data? So data in the 18th century relied on domain knowledge and expert knowledge. So, for example, in order to determine the insurance premium and where to build bridges and so on, what people did is to ask experts, and the expert has their own, experience and so on. And based on their experiments, they decided they made advice. So expert judgments counted. But it changed to 19th century, where that more and more emphasis has been put on accountability, and the numeric figure became the basis of judgment and policy decisions. And that still applies today, right? For example, many people believe that the numbers allow for objective judgment. That's a reason why we use, for example, we measure the richness of country by GDP. Well, I don't know whether this is correct or not. Maybe this is not the claim that I make in the Social Science Institute. But anyway, we evaluate for example, Samsung and so on with their share price and so on. And also we measure the quality of paper by impact factor, or even measure the researcher based on the number of paper they publish and so on. Of course, these are all bad practices, not recommended practice. But this is what people do, right? People do. And why people do that? Well, because they think that it allows for objective judgment evaluation. So the number counts. So this is documented by Theodore Porter in his Trust in Numbers. All right, and also the statistics. Statistics has promoted the standardization of inferences. For example, standardization of protocols. The idea of statistical analysis is that anyone gets the same conclusion based on the same data, right? So that encourage to use statistical packages and routine statistical inferential procedure. For example, suppose that you have to do like a regression, or you use generalized linear model and so on. And suppose you write a code from scratch using, I don't know, Python or something. Well, I think your reviewer would say that, well, why didn't you use like a package available in R or Python? Why you made it from yourself, by yourself? And I think the reviewer has a legitimate reason to ask that, because if you write your own package, unless you have you are known to be a kind of very good programmer, no one can check whether your program is correct or not. So it is recommended in this aspect that you use a kind of generally available statistical package. But this is kind of black boxing your method, right? If you use our package and so on, you don't know what is going on inside, right? Well, of course you can check, but not many people check the inside, the code. So it's a kind of standardization and black boxing, right? And also the formalization. Well, we are asked to report p-value, the Bayes factor, and so on. And why is that? Well, because it allows to evaluate the goodness of inference without domain knowledge. For example, suppose you hear some kind of medical outcome, medical research, and something is good for your health or something, and you first thing you do, well, of course, you don't know anything about what they are saying. You don't know what kind of experiment and so on. But if you check that, for example, p-value or something, you think that, well, okay, so this is well supported, or this is, well, this is kind of, you need a kind of large grain of salt and so on. So the p-values and Bayes factor, and these allow to evaluate the quality of inference without knowing, without having any domain knowledge. So this is kind of formalization. So it leads to kind of recipe-like statistics, as Mayo discussed. Well, it is kind of black boxing the inferential process. But I think it is a kind of one of the necessary consequence of using a statistical method. The use of statistical method or idea of statistical methodology has a certain kind of motivation for black boxing the inferential process. So this, but actually, I think this is also a nature of the use of statistics. But anyway, the statistics promote standardization in this way. So what's the upshot? The upshot is the mechanization of science. So I said that scientific knowledge stands upon two pillars: rationality, which include explicit rule or following explicit rules, and objectivity, which include elimination of bias and so on, subjectivity. And these are guaranteed. These became kind of supported by mechanistic recording, quantified evidence, and standardized inferential protocols. So, and the idea here is that, well, in doing so, we depend less on the interest or judgment or skill of individual scientists. And rather, we follow explicit rules and protocols, and so that we reach to the same result and conclusion, whoever we are. So it doesn't depend on any individuals, right? So seems like the motto is that lose yourself to the mechanistic procedure to achieve the scientific objectivity. So it seems like this is the way that the history of science has proceeded. Well, it looks like it's a kind of the, how do you feel? Well, it's kind of the, I don't know, kind of uneasiness. I feel some kind of uneasiness. Well, I thought that we are doing science and we pride ourselves on doing science, but actually science promoted the mechanization of ourselves. Right? It's a kind of human alienation. And it is a human alienation because think about it. What is to think objectively? Think objectively is to think in accordance with others, right? Right? Objective thinking is that objective as your peers think, right? At least. And subjective feeling or subjective idea are treated here as kind of noise, right? So this is kind of self-alienation. You have to suppress yourself, your subjective feeling and so on. And how about rationality? Well, think rationally is actually to judge and think and so on according to some rules like actions. So, if you, calculate or if you do mathematics, well, you cannot derive a conclusion as you wish. You have to follow the rule, right? You have to follow the rule of arithmetic and so on. So you have to defer your judgment to some kind of external criteria, which might be actions or protocols and so on. This again is a kind of self-alienation in a sense. So these are self-alienation, but to where? Well, the idea is that to the human rationality. So we suppress our subjectivity so that we become rational human. So that was the idea of the Enlightenment and the modern philosophy and science. For example, Descartes. He said that common sense is best distributed in the world. So everyone has common sense. Common sense here, he means the ability to correctly judge. Right? It's not the common sense we mean today, but it's the ability to correctly judge and make judgment. And he said that everyone has this. Everyone has this. So by suppressing subjectivity and deferring our judgment to external criteria, we can we can arrive at this human rational human. And each individual can become a rational human. Okay, so the whole outcome is something like this. So we describe scientific knowledge as standing upon rationality, which ensures understandability, and on the other hand, also upon objectivity, which ensures the public nature of science. But what unifies all these things is the ideal of rational human being in the era of enlightenment. So science as a kind of hallmark of the rational human being, and that is the idea of enlightenment era. Of course, this is a very kind of rough idea, but well, it gives an idea. Okay. But yeah, great. But the problem we are facing, I think now, is can we keep such a scientific ideal today? So this is a very old idea, right? It's in the era of enlightenment. It's like 200 or 300 years ago. And well, it's shaped our science and remarkably. So, but can we keep this ideal? So that's a problem. That's a question we want to ask in the third part. Okay. Okay. So this is the final part, the AI-driven automation of science. So AI-driven science is here. So am I okay on time? Yeah, okay. Yeah, so it's a kind of long, long session, but please bear with me. I think that I will be finished in 20 minutes or so. So the AI-driven science is here. Well, of course, we have 2 Nobel winners related on AI, and protein folding and so on. So deep learning is sweeping, but how does it affect the nature of scientific justification and our notion of rationality and objectivity? Because it seems like AI is doing very well in each aspect of scientific justification. Well, automated experiment is coming in biology and the other fields. And of course, we have a big data. So the AI is very good in handling data and adjusting and kind of coding data and so on. And also the analysis by deep learning is very powerful. So it seems like it affects every aspect of scientific justification. Then how does it change our science? Or maybe it can write a paper by itself. So what are we going to do? So yeah, but deep neural networks, what are they? Well, actually, they are just gigantic statistical models. So in this sense, it's still a model of the uniformity of nature, which bridges the big data to big data. So yeah, this is just a statistical model. But it's so huge that what is going on inside is not so clear, well, not clear at all. At least it's not as clear as conventional statistical models. So complex neural network models allows for accurate and flexible predictions, but it's said to be opaque. It's hard to understand what's going inside, and also it's uninterpretable. That is, estimated parameters are not so meaningful. So, yeah, that is posing a kind of concern in various respects. So, but well, if you think about it, but seems like, well, AI is great. I mean, if you think about the Enlightenment ideal, AI seems to be very, it very much the ideal, because it seems like it's very rational. Like at least in the computational capability, well, no human beings can, can be comparable, right? So in this sense, it seems quite rational. The machines can reason far better than humans. So they are more rational, maybe. And about objectivity. So what about objectivity? The idea of objectivity included the kind of the promoted automated judgment, right? The more automated it becomes, the more objective it becomes. That was the idea. So machine judgment should be really objective because it does not require any human, well, very kind of little human intervention. So it seems like it's very rational and very objective. So why we need to concern about it? So maybe we have to lose ourselves to AI, and so that's a kind of question. Well, there are some concerns. Well, because so granted that they might be quite rational and objective, but what about understandability and publicness? And these are also important scientific ideals. So how these parts are taken care of by AI-driven science? That's the question we are asking today, I guess. And if you think about these aspects, there are certain kind of concern. Start with the understandability. So the justification, we deal with justification and traditional statistics. And that included, for example, logical derivation from explicit premises in the base, or in the frequentism, it is based on the theory-based reliability assessment. And these are all mathematical derivation of general inference rules. And in this case, in this sense, it's kind of rule-based or kind of physics-like approach. But compared to that, justification in deep learning is mostly empirical. That is, its reliability is based on the benchmark test. There's no theory to derive the reliability of a particular deep learning model. And so its reliability is measured based on a certain kind of brand. So that's the reason that we have a name for each model, like a GPT-4 or AlphaGo, and so they have proper names. It's very interesting, right? We don't have that kind of practice in statistical model. You don't name your statistical model like something, right? So, but they name their model. That is because that the reliability is tied to a particular model. So it's a kind of individual based. And it's basically engineering innovation of individual architecture. So there's no general kind of inferential framework or anything. Well, of course, there are, attempts to build a general framework, but we are not yet there. So it's kind of model-based and biology-like. So because it works on particular biological system like Homo sapiens or something like that. So there are, of course, multiple attempts to understanding AI capability, and I distinguish two approaches. One is kind of more externalist approach. I'm not saying that this is the externalist, but it's a kind of more external in the sense that when this is, I also call it like a physiological because it looks like a physiological investigation of biological systems. It studies mechanisms and learning method that contribute to AI's performance. That include architecture, like the convolution, attention, and so on, and also the normalization, regularization, and the GAN and probing, and so on. Well, these are all kind of try to enhance the ability of AI performance. It is as if that physiologists try to uncover the physiological or developmental basis of an animal, like echolocation of bat. Well, bat can do echolocation. That's amazing. That's great. How such an amazing performance is possible? Well, let's dissect the bat's brain and what kind of neural mechanism make it possible. So this is a kind of physiological approach. We do the same thing for AI. And the other is psychological or internal approach. So AI seems to make judgment. Well, they are making judgment, classification, prediction. But on what ground they are making such judgment? And we want to kind of unpack the black box, So we want to check what kind of representation they are making and try to explain their kind of basis, like XAI, explainable AI, or such project. Here, the analogy is like trying to understand how bats perceive the environment. We want to kind of put ourselves into bats' shoes and try to see what they are seeing. So these are kind of two approaches. But okay, so but this approach, I don't have any worry about this approach. Okay, so the people are working on this side. Well, I think they're doing great. And but how about this approach? Because there's some skepticism about whether this kind of approach makes sense. And I think that the skepticism is to some extent real. So there's a question to answer. There's a reason to ask whether this kind of approach really succeed. That is, can we really know what it's like to be in AI? Can we really understand the inner, can we have an inner understanding of AI? Philosopher Ernst Nagel wrote a famous paper called What is it like to be bats? And he claims in this paper that we can never understand what it is like to be bats, because they perceive the world in a completely different way. Can you imagine doing echolocation? I can't. I really can't. So, well, you cannot imagine that. Likewise, maybe it's impossible to understand AI's ontology and how it thinks. And this is not baseless. Well, we know several kind of evidence that maybe it is very hard to understand what AI is thinking. One is adversarial attacks. So this is a famous example where, so in an image classification algorithm, if you input this picture, the machines answer that, okay, so this is panda, right? But if you add this kind of the noise on this picture, and the result is this picture, well, it doesn't look different to me, but the machine says, well, this is definitely given. So we are looking the same thing here. We are looking at the same panda here, but machines think that this is panda and this is given. Given. So they have completely different, they are looking at completely different things. So it seems like they have a different ontology than ours. So that is one problem. And this is a kind of fundamental problem. And also, the philosopher Quine proposed this problem, indeterminacy of translation, which claimed that there are, so we are kind of trying to translate machine to human language or human understanding. But is it really possible? The Quine claims that there are multiple possibilities, multiple translation rules that are mutually inconsistent. So if that is the case, well, it suggests that, well, XAI is kind of trying to make a translation from machine to ourselves. But then there are multiple inconsistent translation exist. Then XAI is a kind of quest with no definitive answer. So these are, I think, the fundamental problems. So it's very hard. It's very hard to understand what AI think about. So it's about understandability of AI, and objectivity of AI is also a problem, right? It's a kind of common problem, well-known problem, where AI is really objective, like that there are reported case that AI is making a decision based on the properties that are not really, that we don't consider really objective, like deciding who to hire based on genders and so on. So and the problem here is that if we take AI as an objective mechanism, it might stabilize the prejudice and the discrimination in the data under the name of objectivity. So, And that also the problem is that we cannot even notice the bias if it is a black box. So that, I think, is a problem. It's not just that, well, it is not behaving objective. But if we take the machine objectivity as the objectivity, then that, well, it kind of stabilizes the prejudice and so on. So that's the reason I think we cannot give up understandability, because our society is a kind of space of reason. The space of reason means that nothing can occupy its social place without due reason. For example, consider buildings, cars, and drugs. What kind of building can be built? What kind of cars can be driven? What kind of drug can be prescribed? Well, they are all regulated. They are all laws that allows which is possible and which are not possible. So you need justification to exist, to introduce something to the society. And that requires certain kind of accountability. So why this it happens and so on, especially when there's a problem, we have to go roll call and so on. Yeah, so explanation is necessary, and explanations are necessary for stakeholders, for consumers, companies, government, policymakers. And so if AI is to be integrated to society, we need this kind of explainability and accountability. So that's, I think, the reason that we cannot give up understandability. So the upshot is that, well, it seems like there is a kind of deep gap between the rationality and the understandability and objectivity and the fairness and the public nature of science. So seems like if we have a kind of machine rationality and objectivity, well, that is great. But if we don't care about their understandability and the objectivity, we kind of end up with a kind of incomprehensibility of science that leads to kind of mystification of science and also unfairness, that science is kind of become the kind of for the majority or established people. And that is actually the challenge for the Enlightenment ideal, for the rational and scientific humanity, right? So, well, what it becomes, I don't know, but well, it's kind of becoming like something like the medieval picture, right? So we have the kind of the godlike machines, like, well, the super rational and very objective, and it kind of gives an answer as kind of a revelation, and we take it as oracle. But oracle is a truth without understanding or justification, right? And maybe we can use large language models to interpret what they are saying. Well, maybe it's kind of translate or prophet. But yeah, I don't know to what extent it works. And also the exegesis. Well, we have to interpret AI and we have to communicate with AI. But it seems like this skill, the communication skill with AI, is limited to a very small number of people, like those people in tech companies or the so-called the prompt engineers and so on. But these looks like a really medieval, right? Well, tech companies act as a kind of new church. I mean, they have a privileged access to AI and so on. And also prompt engineering look like a really shaman, like it's like a modern shaman. They know the spell to communicate with the God and so on. So it's a very kind of medieval-like picture. So I'm not saying that we should stop using AI or anything. Well, I don't think it's stoppable. It's inevitable. It's like, you know, the Copernican revolution or something. So if it's made, well, it's made. We cannot hide it. So we have to deal with it. We have to deal with it. But we have to think about how to deal with this. I think that's a question we face today. So this is the last slide. So we start out with a modern ideal of rationality and objectivity based on which stands scientific knowledge. And we have seen that in the Enlightenment, this is united or integrated under the concept of rational human beings. But today, the challenge posed by AI is that we are kind of having a gap between these two layers. So, and the science become more and more powerful and rational and objective, whereas that our understanding and the public nature are getting kind of challenged. So the conclusion is that AI-driven science is a dream of science. I think it's a dream of science. If we define the dream of science in terms of its formation, in the Enlightenment formation of science, because it's rational and objective, automated, mechanized. So it's a kind of dream of science. But the question is whether it is our dream. We dream of such a science. I think this is a different question, and the question we have to ask. I think what we need is a kind of new story. So the Enlightenment is a kind of new story, right? It's a kind of dogma. It's a rational human being is a dogma. So there's, well, I don't know whether we are rational as they thought. But so it's a kind of dogma, but it was a useful dogma that united many ideals. So, and that ideals is kind of expiring. So what we have to do is to to have a new story that relates science, human, and our society. With that said, well, thank you very much. 감사합니다.
자유롭게 질문을 해주시면
Can I ask a question?
Oh, please.
It was an enlightening talk. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
I have a very minor question from your slide. When you introduce yourself, you use one of the term called AIC instead of using model selection. Is there a particular reason you chose that term? I think it was slide 2 or 3.
So it's very early part, right?
Like self-introduction.
Oh, self-introduction. Okay, here. Oh, okay, here. AIC. Okay, yeah. I didn't hear it. Well, yes, I have an AIC here. Oh, what is it? What is it?
Why you chose that term instead of using model selection?
Oh,
so
yeah.
DIC.
Oh, of course. Yeah, yes, right. Yeah, that's a raised question. Yeah, well, I could do it model selection, but the reason is simply because I dealt with AIC. I featured AIC in my book. So there's not more fundamental reason. Well, it could be other information criteria or model selection techniques, but particularly I focus on the AIC in my book. So that's the reason. So this is a kind of limitation of my book. So sorry.
Well, it's not. I don't think it's a limitation. I thought you have a philosophical reason to choose AIC as a research topic.
Oh yeah. Of course. Yeah, that's a motivation, right? Yes. So the BAC, I think the BAC is more kind of has a different motivation than AIC. So AIC, I think, is concerned about specifically concerned of predictive performance of a model, and that has a kind of interesting parallel to the some ideas in the philosophy which I discussed in my book called Real Patterns and so on. So I thought that the AIC best fit that kind of philosophical exploration. But of course we could, I'm not denying that other information or model selection techniques like BAC or so on, I think that they have their own interesting philosophical issues, but that are not covered in my book. So yeah.
It seems like I have to read your book to understand.
Please, yes. Thank you.
Another question.
Yes.
Since there's none, like you use the term bootstrapping to explain when you come up with this part, and like, do you have any your own concerns or your thoughts on issues with data reusing? Because bootstrap basically using data again and again.
Yeah.
So from people who are not in statistics, they challenge about that concept. Why you use they use data again and say it's working.
Yeah.
I have that kind of question oftentimes. So
Yes, that's very intriguing. Yes, I'm very intrigued by Bootstrap and fascinated by it. Why it works? That's kind of like a magic or cheating. So I don't have a good answer, but my current understanding of Bootstrap is that, well, it's a kind of way to kind of try to understand the uniformity of nature, that the things that is there that support our kind of inductive inference. But my impression is that it's not really try to capture the things there is, but it solely focus on predictive performance. And it measures the predictive performance, and if you focus on this aspect, there are certain aspects of Bootstrap that make sense, that you use the same data twice or three times and so on. So if you take the Bootstrap as a kind of way to perceive something behind data, well, that sounds pretty much cheating because you only saw once. So but if if your goal is not like the kind of perceiving something beyond data, but just trying to estimate or evaluate the predictive performance, well, of course, I cannot say the whole thing here, but I'm kind of thinking that, well, maybe, well, it makes sense for that particular purpose. But and also another thing is the Bootstrap come in a variety. There are different flavor of Bootstrap, like the semi-parametric Bootstrap and the full Bootstrap and so on. And they have a kind of different ontological assumption, like the full Bootstrap assumes the IID, but the parametric Bootstrap does not have to assume IID and so on. So they come in the different degree of ontological assumptions. And so that is another kind of way to understand why it works, I guess. But yes, that's, I think, the what I can say now. And I can't answer the whole things, but yeah. Sorry, I don't think I'm answering your question, but that's what I think.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much.
Professor Bob from Zoom, question.
Mm-hmm. Oh.
Hello.
Hello.
So, thanks so much for a great talk today.
Thank you.
I'm Hannah Park at the Graduate School of Data Science. Even if I lived a life that has nothing to do with philosophy, I enjoyed your talk greatly. So I have two questions. I'm not sure whether these are relevant enough, but please bear with me. So the first one is, during your talk, you outlined the framework of the scientific justification. And then I'm curious where the causality argumentation can fit into this figure or the scientific justification process, because as an empiricist, I often find myself difficult to build causal arguments with empirical evidences. So if you have any practical advice to empiricists, I would very much appreciate. And the second question is, so modern AI systems are trained by the real world data. And then there's this problem of this feedback loop. So they are so much influential that they start influencing the very world or data source that they are getting fed in. So there is some issue of like maybe data reusing or data contamination, which can reinforce the bias or which can affect the reliability. So do you have any comments about that particular issue? So those are the two questions, causality and then the feedback loop of the data.
Well, great. Well, thank you very much. So I think I have an answer to the first question. I'm not sure if I can have a good answer for the second question. So let me start with the first one. So where causality fits into this picture. Actually, the causation, as you say, is very difficult. And the reason for difficulty is that causation is not about probability. That is, so what we talk about today, I discussed today, is just kind of this uniformity of nature model, right? So there is a kind of uniformity beyond data. But causation means that, well, causation is about intervention, right? So you intervene on the system, but the intervention to the system changed the uniformity because it changed the world. And we are interested in how the world changed. But this information is not included in the world itself. So you have to go up one layer. So in my picture, I have a slide in the yesterday talk, but here I don't have that slide in my current file. But there is a third layer here, third layer on top of probability, and that third layer represents causal model. And all the intervention and the potential outcomes and so on are language that describe this third layer. And we calculate the causal outcome or effect in this third layer and then come back to distribution and sampling. So you have to go up 2 stairs and go down 2 stairs. So that means that your epistemology becomes harder and harder because you first have to estimate the distribution, and with this estimation you have to estimate the causal structure. So that's the reason that causation is so hard. But I think the important thing is that causation requires a further heavier ontology. So that's the reason that causation is kind of tricky, right? So causal inference sounds kind of tricky, and in a way it looks like a probability or regression analysis. Well, you adjust covariate and summarize it in a propensity score. Okay, so what's the difference between the multiple regression and so on? Well, the difference is that the ontology, the underlying ontology is different. So by doing these approaches, you are not estimating this second layer, but the third layer, the hidden layer, the more kind of deeper layer. So that makes the causation unique, different, and also difficult and also interesting. So that's the answer to the first question. And the second question, yes, there is a kind of having a kind of problem of, data are getting kind of saturated. So seems like we are using the whole data in the world. So the AI is the kind of using the whole data. So the data are getting kind of, we are having a kind of shortage of data. So, and then we have a lot of data produced by AI. So they are using the data that they produced. So in that case, yes, we have the problem about how to make sense of the kind of double dipping of the data. Yeah, that's a very interesting question. And I don't know. I don't think I have an answer. Sorry. So, but that's definitely a question, and it has a kind of philosophical flavor to it. So, I'm definitely
So actually, I got that question when you talked about the likelihood principle and those things. So that's my great answers. Thank you.
Well, sorry about that, but thank you very much. I will think about it. Yeah, thanks. Yeah. I have a question from chat, so maybe I should open the chat here. Obviously I cannot read the name, but the professor asked, thank you, I'm interested in sports and related business. Regarding the batting average, do you think batting average past observation is the probability of hitting future present event, which is even in condition of that observation data is constantly changing? Yeah, people tend to believe so, and I think this is misbelief. coming from terminology. I see. Okay, yeah, that's interesting. So can we take the average, the kind of batting rate as kind of the reason to predict the future performance of the batter? Yeah, well, that's a difficult question. Actually, I don't know almost anything about baseball, so I think that really relies on the expert knowledge or domain knowledge of the field. So, sorry, I don't think I have a good answer, but I think the problem is a very interesting one because the problem is that, okay, so the statistical inference relies on the uniformity of nature. The uniformity means that uniform, it's not changing. So the question is whether, whether it is really not changing. And this assumption is rarely satisfied. It may, the things change. So the batter change and so on. So the condition change and so on. So this is an idealization for sure. Nothing appears twice in the real world. Today's me is different from yesterday's myself. So it's different. Many of my cells are repressed. So nothing stays the same. But we think we introduce a certain assumption that to the purpose of current inferential problem, we think they are same. So in the end, this is an assumption. To what extent we can say the batter remains the same, and that is an empirical question. And there is no definitive answer, at least from the outside of the area. So I cannot say anything about that because I don't know about the baseball. But if the expert says that, well, the batter is reliable, it's a kind of, well, the same batter is the same batter. So I don't know. So Otani Shohei is always great or something like that. So then maybe it's justified thinking that using the batting average. But sorry, I cannot say. But it depends. It really depends. Yeah.
질문이 있으시면.
Oh, please.
Well, first, thank you for the talk.
이 마이크를 누르고.
Thank you for the talk. I also heard your talk yesterday and 2 days ago.
Oh, thank you.
My question is, in your slide in challenges for frequencies, you said statistical model is justified based on assumptions, but in my think, statistical model is used for justify assumptions. But you said that assumption is also justified statistical model. So is it a loop logic? How can we find like a bad belief?
Oh yes. So okay. So it's a great question. So I say that statistical inference is based on assumption, but you saying that statistical tools are method to justify assumption, check the assumption. So if it's based on assumption, how to check the assumption, or there seems like there's a feedback, there's a loop. Yeah, that's a kind of big problem. But first of all, yes, there are ways to check statistical assumptions, but when it's always important to be clear about what kind of assumption, what kind of hypothesis you are trying to check. For example, hypothetical testing. Only thing you are testing here is a hypothesis, right? You are testing, you are comparing hypotheses. And you are not testing the testing assumption itself. For example, the assumption that the data follows normal distribution or something. You cannot check that with hypothetical testing. The p-value, low p-value or anything, does not mean that your data is not following the assumption you made. It just says that the data does not follow the null hypothesis. Well, it doesn't say that, but it says against the hypothesis that the data follows the null hypothesis, but it does not say that whether the fundamental assumption of normal distribution in that case is correct or not. So, in order to test that assumption, you have to go down further and look at whether the data really follows the normal distribution. And that you have to resort to a different statistical methods, right? Or maybe to domain experts or domain knowledge and so on. So there is no one test or one statistical method that can test both hypotheses and assumptions that you use to test that hypothesis. So that's a kind of reality. So you have to face it. So there is no such a silver bullet. And to the second question, whether there is a kind of bedrock to justify everything, like including hypothesis and assumption and so on. I don't think there is such thing. I don't think there is such thing. So there is no one kind of silver bullet method that can take care of everything, including your conclusion and your assumptions. That such kind of test or such kind of statistical procedure does not exist, and it cannot be. I don't think it can exist, and that's the reason. The reason is that this is because inductive inference is impossible without an assumption. You always have to resort to certain assumption, and if you are kind of making an inductive assumption on that. Inductive inference based on that assumption, you are not testing that assumption. That's the fate of inductive reasoning. So, yeah, the short answer to the second question is no, there is no such thing. Yeah.
Any other? So you wrote no assumptions, no inductive inference.
Mm-hmm.
So among the practices of standard statistical inference, what do you think are not assumptions? Mm-hmm. Is there any element of statistical inference that are not assumptions?
Are there a statistical method that does not have any
elements of standard statistical inference procedure that's not
free from assumptions?
Yeah.
Well, yeah,
fundamental or intrinsic or not replaceable.
Right. So there are tools, there are methods that have less assumptions for sure. For example, non-parametric statistics make less assumption, obviously, than parametric assumption, like spline and so on, or non-parametric test and so on. You don't have to worry about the distributional assumption and so on. Yes, so they are closer to the assumption-free ideal. And also, I think that the machine learning, it's a parametric model in the sense that it has a lot of parameters that has weight, but it's almost non-parametric in the sense that the parameters are huge. It has less assumptions. And so the less assumption meaning that it's more flexible. So yes, in this sense, you can kind of eliminate assumption, but to eliminate assumptions, you have to pay cost. That is, the cost here is the data set, right? To have a good reasoning with non-parametric statistics usually requires a lot of data than parametric statistics, right? So you have to pay the cost, and of course, to run a deep learning model, you need a big data. You have to train with big data. So yeah, the answer is that of course you try to eliminate assumption, but always at the cost of increasing your sample size. And that is also the problem in the causal reasoning as well. So if you want to do something, So you want to kind of get rid of the assumption, or you want to introduce the further assumption or something. You always need to pay cost in the form of data, and of course the data is not the only currency, but you have to pay in some way or another. So and also the non-parametric statistic is not always fully assumption-free. For example, in the spline, you have to assume that the data are continuous and so on. So the regression curve is continuous and so on. So in this sense, the answer is yes and no. Well, it would be impossible to completely eliminate, but well, to some extent you can eliminate, but you need a cost. You need to pay cost. Yeah.
So, I want to talk about the color of ravens.
Okay, oh great. Why not?
That's my knowledge, ravens are black.
Mm-hmm.
It doesn't depend much on my repeated observations of ravens.
Interesting.
But on theory of genetics, there are genes that determine color of the organism, and also optics and neuroscience. So that makes me pretty sure that ravens will, in the future, will be black with some possibility, low possibility of mutations of gray, white. I don't think any deep learning or powerful AI can change or challenge that. Now, there are many areas of our knowledge of the world, or scientific knowledge, established in that way. The AI or deep learning, I don't imagine changing. So what's the threat or big challenge there?
I see. Oh, that's very interesting. Well, thank you very much for raising that point. Yeah, so I know that ravens are black not because I make a lot of observations, but because I know the genetics. Yes, that's first. Yes, that's a very interesting point. So, and that I think is related to the use of statistics in social science, if I understood it correctly. So, for example, think about physics. Do physicists need to resort to statistics in order to predict, for example, the trajectory of balls or something? Do you think they resort to statistics? For example, if I roll the ball 100 times, well, there's a kind of certain probability that it rolls in this way or something. Do they resort to statistics? Well, obviously no. Why? Why not? Well, because they have the theory, right? They have the theory of mechanics and so on. And with this a priori theory, you can calculate where the balls land. But not many problems, especially in social science, are not like that. Because we often do not have, sorry if you have, sorry, but I think that we don't have such a kind of ground theory that connect, for example, the minimum wage and employment rate or something like that. If there is a kind of Newtonian theory that kind of connect these kind of two different things, well, of course, maybe we don't have to resort to statistics. But given that we don't have a general theory, we have to establish the relationship first. So in that case, you need to resort to statistics. So the raven example, I have to admit, well, we have a theory. So maybe to predict the blackness of raven, we don't need to resort to statistics. But if you don't know anything about genetics, well, of course you are educated, so you know about the physiology of the ravens. But if you come to the very new territory and you have never observed a certain kind of bird, and 2 or 3 birds are white, I think that you make a prediction that based on your experience, you don't know anything about this bird. Maybe you think that it is also white in the next observation. So statistics serve for prediction in the area where you don't have a theory. So that's our first point. And the next question, I think, is whether our theoretical understanding is undermined by such thing as AI's prediction. Yeah, that is a very interesting question, and I don't know. But currently, what AI is doing is they are doing very well in the field where there is no theory. For example, protein folding. We had some theory, but the theory is not perfect at all. And the AI is overwhelming the theoretical result by just pure empirical method. And your question is that what happens if there is a kind of the AI computation that kind of conflict with quantum mechanics and something like that? Which do we choose? I don't know, but I think I think the final arbiter is a nature. So if the AI's predictions was better, then I don't know the current the standard of physics, like the standard model or something. I can imagine that the physicist would say that, well, maybe our theory was wrong. So AI is getting something correct here. I can imagine that. So I think this is the kind of the ideal of empirical science. So we have to let nature to have a final say. So yeah, but how do you think? Do you think that if a theory is so strong that we can reject the AI? Well, it can be possible, but I don't think it's always the case. Okay.
So I think the fundamental problem is that for empirical science, all the theories are hypotheses,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Mm-hmm.
And so there cannot be any guarantee that your theory is correct. So
Mm-hmm.
empirics should come first. And if some kind of regular like relationships are found by machine learning methods, probably that would be correct.
Mm-hmm.
That's what I think as an empirical scientist.
Mm-hmm.
Don't you think?
Yeah, I think so. Yeah, I think so. But well, it's a very difficult decision. For example, if our theories are very well confirmed, the good history, well, not a single data set refute the theory, so it doesn't proceed. The science does not proceed as Popper thought. So there's no critical experiment that single-handedly refute the well-established theory. So you have to check and check, and the accumulation of anomalies finally beat the theory. So I don't think the one single result where AI excels gonna lead us to give up the I don't know the physical theories and so on. But well, I think it's well possible if it is repeated and AI makes some kind of accumulation of good record and credit. Well, that's possible. But
and the possibility that whether AI could predict the existence of any genetically mutated red raven or so.
Maybe so. Yeah.
It fully depends on the type of training data they have. So every single individual or every discipline has different way of abstracting the world. Right? If their way of abstraction includes genetics, then AI should discover that if certain chromosomes get mutated, then there will be color differentiation or variation, and there can be red raven.
Yeah, maybe so. Yeah. Anyway, it's very complex. Genetics is very complex, so we don't know the whole development network that leads to the color of raven. So yeah, that's possible. Yeah.
And one question related to when you said about Pearson's the grammar of science.
Mm-hmm.
So basically, Pearson may want to claim that statistics may be the only or best possible way of justifying empirical knowledge, something like that?
I don't think so. I don't think. Well, actually, that book. Well, I am kind of forgetting the exact content of the book, but yeah, he's not claiming that. I don't think he's claiming that statistics is the grammar of science. Actually, he does not discuss so much about the statistics in that book, but of course, well, he discussed to some extent. But his claim was not that statistics is the grammar of science.
I totally agree with all of your points. And the problem now is that whether there can be any other types of grammar.
Well, of course.
Can justify their empirical findings or not.
Yeah, of course. Yeah, of course. I think that, of course, it's not.
What should be the standards? What should be the criteria of justification?
Well, that's a very difficult question, but interesting. I don't think that the statistic is the only justificatory method. It is a method. Well, of course, it's a very good method. Well, with some reservation, but it's doing relatively well. But there are, of course, the method to justify based on the qualitative data and narrative and so on. Because in some cases, we don't have quantitative data and that does not fit to the statistical framework. In that case, what are we going to do? Well, we cannot just give up the research. Well, we want to know something, right? In that case, we have to resort to certain narratives and the qualitative data and so on. And then the question is, what is the inferential standard and protocol and so on? It's very hard to, build a framework because it's the whole idea, well, not the whole idea, it's a part of the idea of paradigm, scientific paradigm. Yeah. It's very difficult.
And it's their job to build such rigorous, some kind of standard criteria or filtering norms.
Of course.
And the fundamental problem is that they probably, qualitative scholars may have their own, but we are in the same department.
Yeah, so what's the problem?
They're talking about the same topic, we're talking about the same topic, and the conclusion is different, and their claims are different. And you should say that we should use this statistical justification criteria to evaluate others' claims as well, right? Then what should I do? Yes.
Well, then, I don't know. I don't know about your institution, but I think there should be multiple ways to approach a hypothesis, even the same hypothesis. And I don't think the statistics is necessarily the best way to approach a hypothesis. Because things that we can do with statistics is very limited. And sometimes we need to make an inference about the things that we don't have data. For example, what kind of things lead to the world wars? Well, we have just 2 samples, but we have to do everything to prevent the third world war, right? We cannot wait statisticians to make a conclusion about that. Yeah, so that's very important that we have to have various approaches and justificatory method.
Thank you very much. Please, thank you.
Well, thank you very much. Thank you very much.